Once again, we are on the heels of another mass shooting, and the question is asked, what can we do to prevent this from happening in the future? The question is answered too easily by politicians who, to avoid distancing themselves from lobbyists and special interest groups, choose to blame video games instead of addressing the real problem.
And also video games. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts. And then you go the further step, and that's the movies. You see these movies.
This response is not that uncommon among lawmakers, where it is easier to blame a medium such as video games than it is to blame a culture itself that is in love with guns. If you even mention the word gun control online, you will be almost instantly confronted with memes and comments declaring that it is not guns that kill people, but that the people themselves are unstable and there is no law that could pass that would keep you safe. So why blame video games? Video games have been a target of politicians since the 1980s, when Ronnie Lamb, a president of the Long Island PTA, sought to keep arcades farther away from schools, claiming in a 1982 interview with the New York Times that only the bad kids go into them, and we worry about the young children not old enough to make value judgments. Then, in the 1990s, Joe Lieberman chaired a hearing on violent video games such as Mortal Kombat.
Thank you, Senator Cole, and thanks to all the members of the panel. Just hearing what you've said now, we're also repelled. We're disgusted by this material. And yet it is a measure of our values in this society that we resist the impulse to do what I think, let me say for myself, I'd like to do. I'd like to be able to pass a law saying you can't produce this stuff anymore. We don't do that because we value our freedoms. But with those rights that the producers of video games in this case have also come responsibilities. And that's been the partner to rights in our society. And I think what we're all saying is that we don't feel that this particular industry has carried out those responsibilities in the way that they should, and now's the time to change.
With the threat of video games being regulated federally, the ESRB was formed in 1994, so the video games industry could self-regulate itself. The ESRB had 5 ratings: early childhood, kids to adults, later renamed everyone in 1998, teen, mature, and adults only. The ESRB would also use descriptors with brief explanations of the content contained in the game. Then, in 1997, a case was filed by Jack Thompson in the case of the Heath High School shooting, where the killer had played various games such as Doom, Quake, Castle Wolfenstein, Redneck Rampage, Nightmare Creatures, Resident Evil, and Mech Warrior. The case claimed that the producers of the games were negligent in distributing to a minor and that the games would desensitize them and make them more prone to violence. The case was later dismissed for failing to present a legally recognizable claim. Thompson would continue to fight against the video game industry until he was disbarred in 2008 over claims of professional misconduct. Video games have always been violent, since the 1976 release of Death Race to the more recent releases of games such as Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty. Games are an escape and deliver on a power fantasy of you being the hero and going up against an army of bad guys. In fact, a recent study shows that only 20% of school shooters actually played video games, compared to 70% of high schoolers overall that play. As a matter of fact, Patrick Markey, a psychologist and researcher at Villanova, in a recent article of USA Today says that school shooters tend to do things not typical of their peers, and that by now it is a typical teenage behavior to play violent video games. Studies have even shown that violence actually goes down after the release of a violent video game or movie. So why are politicians so enamored with blaming video games?
Calling on anyone who's in a position of influence, every superintendent, every CEO of every media company that produces a video game that is violent in its nature, the movie producers who make the movies, the record producers who produce the music that we listen to, all of you. We've got to step up. We're the adults. Let's act like it.
It seems that when it comes to gun violence, anything is on the table for debate except the actual weapon that was used. It's time to stop the distraction of blaming mediums such as video games or movies and start looking at the facts. Other countries who consume the same media as us, the same games, have less mass shootings. So what are they doing that is so radically different? They were willing to look hard at the facts and decide that less guns equals less gun violence. What happened in Florida is a tragedy and something that shouldn't ever happen, but until we are honestly able to talk about how to fix it with everything out in the open, it's something that is never going to go away. So let's fix it. Right now, there are a group of kids fighting for the right not to live in fear while attending school. Let's show them that they don't have to be afraid and fix this.